Yes, thank you so much for taking the time coming here. So welcome. I'm doing it. Then we're going to hear a presentation from Diversify, which is Chisom and I. We're going to talk about some foundational considerations and key terms in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Then you're going to hear introduction to design, some case studies, which I can't wait to hear. And then we're going to have a Q&A where first I'm going to ask some questions, our speakers, and then we are inviting you here and the people online to also ask questions. The people online, please put your questions in the chat, and we have people who will follow that. And then we're done, and I hope we'll learn a lot and have fun in the meantime. These are the speakers, me and Chisom from Diversify, and then we'll hear Mimi, Siri, Pankuri, and Manuela from Designit. Okay, so this is it. This is the welcome. Let's get to business. And yes, I was holding this because otherwise people online wouldn't hear me. So you will see. Yeah, we're gonna toss this around.
Hi everyone. We bring the babies, so that's me, and also the colleague with another baby. Things like the work-life integration, we take it very seriously. Okay, so what about us here? I'm the founder of Diversify. I am Nigerian, grew up in the US, and a Norwegian citizen by marriage recently. So yeah, I'm going for gold.
Yeah, I already said I'm Eva. I'm the program director at Diversify. I am from Croatia, have been in Norway for almost 8 years. And yeah, happy to be here.
Great. Does Eva stay there or do we stay here? We're still working out the mechanics. We're good?
Do we need to hold the thing?
Yeah. One of us can just plug in and stay very close to each other. Like, see, we're already starting out the design process. What works best? Okay. What else about me? Okay, I'm going to just say a little bit about Diversify. We're a nonprofit organization that works to amplify diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in workplaces and societies across the world, usually a lot in the Nordics and Europe, but we're also like trekking outside of Europe slowly. Okay, we have somebody in the waiting room. Work. Okay. So as Eva said, we're going to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I reckon some of you have heard, interacted with these terms, show of hands. Okay, good number, fantastic. All right. Okay, quick business case, a lot of text. Ethnically and diverse organizations tend to outperform their competitors by an average of 35%. Organizations with stronger LGBTQIA+ representation and inclusion policies attract better staff and also see significantly higher profits. Companies with higher number of women in upper management show faster growth and higher average profits, right? So we see in some sense the business case because companies like to see how does this contribute to my money? So this is one way. Next, please. All right, so a little bit more, and we can send some of you this if you need. Basically points to when employees are happy or satisfied, productivity and sale increases by 31 and 37% respectively. So now I'm going to jump into what diversity is. Is that next? Okay, so this is this really beautiful wheel. I tend to think of diversity quite simply as demographic identifiers, right? So usually we are born with what's in the inside circle here, like things like age, gender, ethnicity, physical abilities, sexual identity, orientation. These are things we cannot necessarily change. Now, the colorful wheel shows the things that we acquire across our lives. So things like education, parental status. I mean, 5 years ago, I was single in terms of no children and living life. Now I have to think about 2 babies, how to juggle them. So that's a new identity that I have to manage. Things like military experience, political ideology, appearance, how you communicate, those things affect your identity, and that adds to the diversity that you bring into every room. Also important to note that you can also drop some of these identities along the way and acquire more as you move on, depending on what phase you are in your life, which country you live in, and things like this. Okay, so we're going to create a hypothetical table. When we think about diversity, we ask, who is at the table? One of the phrases I like to use to remind myself when I'm designing projects or initiatives is everyone in the room? Is everyone who should be in the room right now, are they here?
Can I just?
Yes.
I think also very important question here is who is not at the table? And this is also something that is very important to consider.
Because sometimes when we go from the positive, we just think about, oh yeah, the people who should be here are here. But then when you think about who does this table exclude, then you have to think from that other angle and say, okay, who might not be present? Some more stats. I think we've made our case in terms of how many stats we have. Yeah? Okay.
It's great to see the numbers. Like the numbers are huge. Yeah.
So for everyone here who comes from different companies, different workplaces, you don't have to answer, but something to reflect on is how diverse are your colleagues? How diverse are your management team? And diversity, no, is not just gender, because in Norway, we like to say gender and then that's it. No, how diverse in opinions, in cultural backgrounds, in physical attributes, in nationalities, religion, how diverse are you all truly? Michael is hanging out with us today. Okay, so when we talk about designing diversity, what are some tips we can think of? There's a lot of things we come up with, but here are some things we're going to talk about today. It's really important to examine the company's makeup and culture. So basically, you should ask things like what can be measured and what can be observed. In Norway and much of the Nordics were restricted by GDPR, right? There are only 3 things we can measure, which is nationality, age, and gender. But we can also observe people around us beyond these 3 metrics and say, how diverse are the people in the room? And how can we attach numbers to the goals that we're trying to reach in an organization? And not being able to measure it on the basis of like, hey, what race are you, or what is your sexual orientation, is not an excuse to actually not have a diverse group of people at the workplace. So, implement inclusive hiring processes. A lot of companies, since we're in Norway likes to hire from the Norwegian universities. So NHH, NTNU, Oslo University, BI. God forbid you have a degree from Harvard. They don't like it, right? So it's, so you need to diversify the places you find talent. You need to think about how do you structure your interviews, right? Because sometimes when we have interviews, there are things like unconscious biases. So for example, for the job that is being interviewed for, you only need like a bachelor or a master's degree. But the first person you interview has a PhD. And then the next person you interview has a master's. And you're like, well, I'm going to compare you to that person that has a PhD, even though that is not what is required. So have a structured system of figuring out how you interview people, what questions you ask them, and also have a diverse interview team, because that brings different perspectives and people have different opinions, right? And you can also use things like anonymous CV assessments. Also want to say that generally this is called blind recruitment, but that is ableist. So we're going to stay away from the blind, anonymous recruitment we can think about. Okay, and of course, there's a lot of technology, plenty. They want to sell you really good stuff. So like figure out the ones you want to use and how that can enable you implement better inclusive practices. There are a lot more processes, but these are just some of the things we'll mention. I talked about diversify hiring channels. And basically what we can think of here is to tap into also communities where different groups gather, right? So it's not enough to say, okay, we're gonna go outside of the, how many universities in Norway? 8, and start recruiting from Europe, the US, Africa, Asia, but also figuring out, hi, maybe I need to go recruit people who have a gap in their CV, right? Maybe I need to go find different ethnic groups or organizations where I could find, like LGBTQ communities, for example, where I could find really great skills that I would ordinarily not reach. And focus on cultural contribution. There's a lot of focus on culture fit. Do you fit in? Fitting in is not the goal. Contributing is the goal. Okay, set specific internal targets for representation. I think what gets measured gets done. KPIs go a long way. And it also holds us accountable, because even if we don't reach them, if we say, for example, we want to increase the number of women in leadership by 30%, right? Even if that is like 2 or 3 women in technical, like in reality, if we fall short, like we recruit 2 or 1, it gives us something, a benchmark to work towards, like, okay, we failed to reach the goal. What did we do differently? What did we do well? What can we learn from it, right? Clearly communicate your diversity values across media channels. Some companies are really great at telling how great they are, but inside, they're not that great. So make sure what you're saying match what you're putting out into the world, because your people know. I've worked at companies or consulted with companies where they have this wonderful thing outside, and then people inside are like, yeah, we do that? What? How? When? Why? Right? Okay, action your words and values. Words are nice, they make us feel good, but people really remember what you do. Remove biased language from job ads. So work hard, play hard. No, not everyone takes that, like, people who say things like, you need to be ambitious, you need to like go for it, you need to driven, competitive. That type of language tends to also apply or appeal to men more than women, for example, whereas more words like passionate appeals, right? So find words that are neutral. Absolutely. Okay, what is inclusion? Inclusion basically is creating an environment where people are empowered to thrive. Just a simple way to think about it. And we also think about empowerment in that people have the resources to empower themselves. I think it's a little bit of a egoistic thing to think, I can empower Eva. I cannot empower Eva. I can set and create an environment where Eva feels empowered to thrive in the best way she can. So, diversity and inclusion. It's important to differentiate, because in Norway we say mangfold or inkludering, as those they are synonyms. They are not synonyms, right? They are maybe sisters, but not twins, right? So diversity is recognizing that you have all these beautiful checkboards to put together, and inclusion is actually making it fit into a cohesive whole. Inclusion from this hypothetical table, we're looking at things like, are everyone's ideas heard, and do they feel comfortable to share those ideas? Because it's one thing to say, like, at meetings, everyone who had something to say said something. Really? Is there somebody that did not say something, or did they code switch what they wanted to say, right? Because if you feel like you're in a workplace, for example, where you have to think 10 sentences ahead, which happens, like, how do I say this? Can I come fully as myself? Can I articulate fully as myself? Or do I have to say things how For example, Norwegians do. There's a difference, for example, between me and my partner who is Norwegian, when he has to say something, it's like, Chisom, perhaps do you think that maybe this is not okay? And I'm just like, babe, that's crap, right? Different ways of doing things, and we have to accept that, All right, more business cases. Innovation increases by 83% at companies that intentionally support diversity and foster inclusion. It improves employee satisfaction and retention rates, because realistically speaking, if you do all that great work to hire diverse talents and then you can't retain them and a year later they leave, it's expensive. So if you're trying to save money, it actually makes sense to invest in creating an inclusive environment where they want to stay. Right? The case for gender diversity is a perfect example of the difference between diversity and inclusion. So if the women in your organization do not feel like equal members of the team, then they will find a better position elsewhere. So to reflect, what are some practices at your workplace that are exclusionary? Something to think about. Who does this include? Who does this think about? Because normally workplaces, society are created for people who identify within the norm, cisgendered, heteronormative folks like myself. So who is it created for, and who are we excluding from that creation process? So how do we design inclusively? Some tips. It's important to use data to map DEI maturity rates. Like, where are we at our organization? How do we think of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? It's really important to recognize that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging means something different in each workplace. So you have to meet your workplace where you are and design for your workplace where you are now and where you'd like to go in the future. So you could also use surveys to map lived experiences and workplace culture. One of the things I heard quite often here is, you can't measure equity, you can't measure inclusion. I mean, yes, you can. You can ask people, how do you feel? It's really that simple. I don't need to know your sexual orientation to measure how included you are. I can just ask you about your lived experiences. And then I can map that into data and make beautiful graphs to show you how you're doing, right? Okay, initiate employee resource groups. These are really great. Kind of like employee resource groups usually are oftentimes voluntary, but they shouldn't be. They should be part of the workplace. So groups like Women in Tech, groups for the LGBTQ community, group for the, say, Black folk at your workplace, right? Religious groups. Use inclusion calendars. These are important to actually make people feel included. Little things that reminds you of, hey, this is happening, or it's Australia Day today. So if you have a coworker who is Australian, you can say, hey, Nikki, happy Australia Day. And it makes them feel seen, right? Little things like this go a long way. And then when we have Pride Month, you don't have to like hustle last minute to do something and have it all be performative, because you're thinking about it way before time. Institute behavioral frameworks, zero tolerance policies, and accountability. Oftentimes people deal with unconscious biases at workplaces. And then you go to HR and they're like, but you need to grow a thick skin. Oh, they do it, they mean it. I don't care if they meant it, they caused harm. So how do you create a process where we can at least talk about it? If you have an inclusive workplace, we can sit down together and go, okay, this harmed me. How can we do better next time to ensure that this doesn't happen? Use inclusive language internally and externally. So unless you really know the girls in your room and you want to call them girls, maybe don't call them girls. Hey, girls, right? When you are having a meeting, maybe you don't want to ask the women to keep taking notes, right? Maybe when you see someone who has a partner, you don't say, because you present as a man, who's your wife? Because maybe they have a partner that is a man, right? Don't make assumptions about where people fit. Mitigate unconscious bias. You do that by training, creating frameworks. The thing about unconscious bias oftentimes is that we talk about intent versus impact. And usually people don't intend to cause harm. but the impact of the action causes harm. So we can't dwell too much on the intent. We have to figure out the impact and say, how do we reduce this harm? And of course, introduce, for example, gender neutral bathrooms and think about universal accessibility. That is very obvious. When I came into this building today, it wasn't very clear to me that there was a ramp where I could come up with my pram. There is, I asked, but it needs to be more visible. Yes. Equality versus equity. So quickly on this, equality is giving people exactly the same platform to access the same thing. And in the Nordics, we love to talk about equality, especially gender equality, for example, right? But equality is the goal, but the only way to arrive to equality is when we use an equity lens and an equity framework. Equity recognizes that people need different resources to arrive at the same points. In this image, you see every single person needs something. I mean, that guy has the apple in his eyes that he's bending over. But when you give them the platforms that they need to arrive at the same points, then you achieve what you're aiming for, which is equality. There's no points in saying, oh, we want everyone to have the same thing, and you have a blind colleague and you're using a type of computer that everybody else is using. That is not equality, because they are not able to do their work. And then from an equity perspective, you have to think about who is not at the table and what barriers do they face to get there. Some more stats, which I will skip over because of time. I'm not even sure how we're doing with time. So in terms of reflections, can you think of a current culture or practice at your company that is equitable, right? And think about it. Is it, for example, the flexibility that you can work from home? That is an equitable practice. Is it that you can work at different times based on what works best for you, as opposed to like clocking in at 8 o'clock and finishing at 4, that you could work in the evening if that works best? Does your workplace allow that, right? Can you go on vacation and work? Things like this. Do you have the type of resource, say, for example, if you prefer to stand up while you work, do you have ergonomic table thingies to do so, right? Okay, more things. Eva, feel free to jump in here. So I keep hearing my voice. It's not always great. Yeah, so just like quickly, co-create what equity means within your workplace. I think it's really important to note that oftentimes when solutions are designed, they're designed without the inclusion or leadership of the people who those solutions are meant for. So if you're designing something for women and you're an all-man team, how the heck are you supposed to know what they need, right? So include people in the design process. Maybe some of us don't know here, but the seatbelt was initially designed for men because the dummy that they used to test it was modeled after the male body. Now, guess what happens when a woman gets in there? She might likely die in case of an accident, right? So think intentionally, because oftentimes we're like, oh, but we did not do it intentionally to exclude people. But when you don't think of me, you exclude me, whether it's intentional or not. Invest in learning and development, you know, like leadership courses, allyship courses, anti-racism courses, unconscious bias. Recognize that people have different needs designed for them. For example, parents, people with disabilities. Increase transparency of promotion, pay, and benefits. It can be this arbitrary thing that just happens, like, oh, I feel it in my guts that this person deserves the promotion. Why? Let's have a process. Like, so I know if I'm in this role for 2 years, then I get to the next role and this is how much I'm going to earn. And you have a situation where people doing the same work are not earning different amounts of money because one person negotiated better than the other. Make the workplace or role adjustments available to everyone. And of course, always think about what are workplace barriers and how can we mitigate them. Belonging, this is the last one. Okay. Belonging, I always like to say, is a feeling of, for me, being at home, watching Netflix with a bowl of chips. I mean, binging with Netflix. Let's just be realistic. Yeah. Just feeling like I can be myself. I don't have to present as anybody else. That is a feeling of belonging. And that is ideally what we also want to cultivate in the workplace. And really important to note that belonging is different from fitting in. Belonging is standing out and being included and respected and appreciated for how you are. It's not about fitting into a place. So belonging would be the difference between integration and assimilation, where integration is like, bring yourself and take what you want from here. Assimilation is like, drop everything you want and become like us. Okay. So here's this thing we put together for inclusion, belonging, equity, and diversity. We think of it as a continuum. It continues to fit into each other. Diversity fits into equity, equity to belonging, belonging to inclusion. What haven't I said? And inclusion to diversity. And it goes on and on and on. And it's a continuum. You don't do like a year-long or 2-year-long program and you go like, yes, we've cracked it. Oh, we've passed time. Okay, I'm gonna go skip this one. And reflection. Can you think of any actions to further promote a sense of belonging at the company you work? And more things to think about that we won't go through because we don't have time. I talk too much. And thank you. Thank you.
All right. Like stuff.
You did this and disappeared, Mimi. I saw it.
I clicked so
Magic.
sorry, Tony, you did prep me for this. All right. Thank you very much. Shizam, that was great. I was given the task to introduce you all to design, which is a massive responsibility. And then they gave me 3 minutes. So I decided to change the task and rather I'll tell you what I think design is and some reasons why I became a designer myself. All right. First and foremost is people. Design is about people, and when done right, design will put people at the center always. And who is people? People is direct users that will use a product, a service, a website, but also people around it that will pack, sell, clean, distribute, and so on. When done right, design will always respond to user needs. People, I should have clicked that before. Good design responds to people needs. Second reason is the explorative aspect of it. As designers, we usually approach a problem by saying, I don't know what I'm going to find, but let's go and try and figure it out. This makes a process really creative and fun. And it also means that it doesn't always work the way that you planned it to work. And sometimes it results in some ideas failing. But what I love about it is instead of just hurting your ego or just dropping it and doing something else, you take it, you try to learn what went wrong, you fix it, you edit again, test again, and so on. It's always adapting. Thirdly is collaboration. So design is a highly collaborative discipline. It's never a one person's effort, and it's usually collaborating with different expertise and with different users based on their own lived experiences. Now, there's much more to design than what I just said in the last 2 minutes. But these are the 3 things that I wanted to highlight. So I think in the end, for me, design is creating something for people through an explorative and a collaborative process. Now, what does that have to do with inclusion? I think it's our responsibility when we're working with methodologies like these that include people to make sure that all voices are heard and all perspectives are taken into account. On top of that, as designers, I think we sit at a really privileged position where what we make has the impact to reach loads of people. So to be honest, in my head, design done right should be inclusive by default, always. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. And that is why we're here, to start a conversation and to show you how we have been navigating this landscape. Really lucky to work here, where DI is given the importance and taken seriously as it should be. And we're going to see some projects with some specific cases and examples and like practical how it works. But I wanted to show you what goes on kind of behind closed doors. We have set up a DI ecosystem where we tried to implement inclusion at different levels. So at an individual level, at a discipline or role level, and finally as an organization. And this includes things like awareness program for training, revising how we do our hiring processes, a guide on how to handle offensive remarks. And I can talk about this for a really long time. So if anyone is curious about this bit, just find me afterwards because I'm happy to talk about it. And I just wanted to close up with just sharing that we have found that diversity, equity, inclusion, and inclusive design are these big, very complex topics that sometimes can be a bit paralyzing. So we just wanted to show practical examples of how we have navigated these challenges with a design perspective to hopefully inspire you to try and do more inclusive practices at your own work. That's that. And Siri, you take over.
Okay, so we have been lucky enough, I have been lucky enough to work with the new trams for Oslo over the past 7 years. The vision being to, of course, create an inclusive tram for everyone. We work together with the Sporveien and the Ruter. And it's sort of the next generation trams for Oslo, and acquiring 87 new trams. It's a huge procurement process. It's not when we say we work with Ruter and Sporveien, Designit was only one of the partners in a very big conglomerate of experts doing a lot of the work. Involvement of experts, the general public, and specific user groups was key to reach this vision of Oslo Tram that is for everyone, and to also to create engagement and ownership to the final solutions. I don't know, have you taken the tram? Has everyone tried it? Yeah, the new and the old? Yes. Okay, so how did we create an inclusive tram? Firstly, we created a very inspiring vision to align internally within the team, but also to sort of set the standard and expectation of what the potential suppliers could deliver to us. We wanted to say what we want so that we're not controlled by what the suppliers can offer of solutions. So this was a very big work developing a design guide where inclusive was one of the values actually. But saying that by text is maybe not enough because we have to show what do we mean inclusive. So there was a lot of like visual material going alongside that. We involved public and experts in all the different phases of. Sorry? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we include some random experts on no, but it was really important to involve both the public and experts in all the phases of the project, from creating the wish list for what we want from the tram, to evaluating the proposals that came in, to selecting a supplier and the platform to build the tram on, to design the details in the design phase, and solution and measure that the solutions that we now have 17 of going around in Oslo actually lives up to the vision that we set. And we worked very closely with the suppliers in the design phase. Yes, and we measured public satisfaction. And so how do you recruit for all? It's kind of a massive challenge, and it really put us in a spot where, I mean, the tram is it's of course the subject of universal design, but when you talk about the standards for universal design, there is no standard that is for trams and light rail tracks. So we had to kind of lean on the train standards, but they don't really necessarily apply to something that is lighter going around in the city center. So we could only lean on some of the standards and regulations, and we had to kind of navigate ourselves. But when we recruited, we tried to go out really wide, to not set strict boundaries of who was in and out. So, for example, someone with reduced mobility, it doesn't really have anything to do with age. Traveling with kids, pregnant, pram users, rheumatism, other types of movement challenges. And we worked also very closely with interest organizations, because in this case, universal design and like you mentioned, Shizam, making sure that the building blocks and the how do we make it equitable and not just equal is very important. Funnily enough, the flat floor is completely flat, is what makes it equitable and accessible to more people. So there are no steps inside the tram. Very important.
Yes.
Yes. And I was so glad you mentioned like how actually working and involving with a diverse group of people, and we found that we cannot sit here and evaluate a tram proposal without testing it. So we had quite a lot of testing, user testing throughout the entire project to really understand, is this a good workplace for small, tall, old, young, new, experienced driver? This entrance area, what does it actually like? It looks like there's a turning circle for a wheelchair, but how is it actually to turn there? So I had to teach one of the digital designers at the Ruter how to use a glue gun. But we built a lot of these prototypes, very low threshold, very rough and dirty, to test and test and test and test and test. Yes, and as I mentioned, like the low floor design is the most appreciated physical feature of the new tram across all age groups. That was one way of us, or at least know that we have talked to a general representation of the public. We used age as a kind of parameter just to see from 13 to 70 plus. And in this case, it's not about designing like special solutions, it's about removing obstacles, which I think is what inclusive design is all about, removing these obstacles and barriers. Yes, and from the verification phase or the measuring in the end, we interviewed very many people. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but one of the wheelchair users said that now finally I can take the tram. She couldn't before, but she said, I can even sit next to my friends inside, the belonging of traveling together. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. This is working. Yes, it is. Is it? Yes. There you go. Hi, my name is Pankuri. My name is basically of Indian origin, which means a petal. But today I have decided to dress up like a leaf. So this is a very intentional choice. But yeah, deviating from that very sad attempt at self-depreciative humor, we are here to talk about Tensio and Linnea and some of the work that we have done with this current project that we are involved in. Brilliant. So to clarify, I'm here to talk about our long-term engagement with two public NetLaya companies called Tensio and Linnea. NetLaya as a term refers to the network rent you pay to a local energy grid provider. And these companies are the ones that own, operate, and maintain the electricity networks in the space where you live and work. The aim of this project was to design and develop user-friendly websites and customer portals. And this project started earlier in Jan this year, where we spent the first couple of months working on the insights phase. And we are now moving into the design and development of these customer portals, which are user-friendly and more accessible. One of the key tasks of this project, especially of the insights phase, was to talk and interview a diverse set of users to understand and become familiar with some of the challenges and limitations which they might face, especially when it comes to accessing payment portals and being able to get in touch with these companies when they might have some questions or queries or want to pay a bill and so on and so forth. And a lot of the insights work came in from interviewing a very diverse set of users, along with a lot of other data-driven project work, which has now informed and is continuing to inform our design and development work on this project. Since it isn't always possible to start on a project from ground zero, when we did get an opportunity to collaborate with Tensio and Linnea from the ground up, we took this opportunity in stride and kind of like took the bull by its horns and tried our darndest and hardest to establish an inclusion and accessibility-led design rig that considers and puts users with different needs and special needs at the center of the conversation of our design work, and helps us make a service which is accessible to as many people as possible. In order to focus on inclusive design and accessibility as drivers for our design work, we initially worked on a legal framework. Actually, this is not supposed to be here, sorry. Yeah. We initially worked on a framework at the beginning of this project, so setting the legal documentation in place, in which we specified that during our ongoing engagement on this project, we will continue to collaborate with various voluntary organizations that focus and help on supporting people with various special needs, visual impairments, cognitive impairments, functional impairments, and so on. And this will help us get in touch and talk to people with special needs, and they will help us inform our design work by sharing their limitations, their challenges, and guiding us on how we can do a better job in designing for them. Getting the legal framework in place in the earlier days of this project had a lot of benefits. And while it was slightly time-consuming, stressful at the beginning, the benefits were that we will be able to manage the expectations of all the stakeholders, let everyone know that inclusive design practices are embedded in the foundations of this project, and plan for recruitment of diverse user groups for testing and evaluation, plan our resource allocation in advance so that we don't have to compromise on the quality of our work. This meant that we could already recruit a diverse set of users and look at the range in demographics, look at the range in perspectives, look at people with special needs and speak to them, give them an opportunity to share their challenges with us so that they could help us, guide us, and make us do a better job. And that we did. So we spoke to around 50 plus users, some of whom identified as those with special needs, and they were both external and internal user groups. So people who worked in these firms, but also people who were at the customer facing end of these firms. So customers who get in touch with them, who call up their customer service for queries and all that. Here you can see a little photograph of a rig within a rig where we are engaging in a couple of interviews digitally. And these are some of the quotes that we sort of picked out from some of the interviews that we took. So a lot of these comments we realized are quite synonymous to some of the challenges people would face regardless of regardless of whether they have special needs or not. And this helped us bring into light a very critical set of things that we need to keep in mind when we're designing for people with a wide range of needs, disabilities, and none. During the insights phase, we also collaborated with universal design experts to carry out an expert evaluation of the current websites which exist with the client. And all of this was done before we even touched our sketchboards and thought of any design work. So here you can see is a photograph from a rig that happened on the 5th floor, where we got all the stakeholders in the same room as us and experts in universal design who work with a variety of accessibility tools. So they look at braille keypads, they look at eye tracking devices to help navigate digital spaces. And the aim of these evaluations was to get the clients to see the challenges that these experts were sharing with them and take them into consideration, which will then again lead our design work. So kind of playing at this project from every perspective and making sure everyone is on the same page. So we recruited experts with functional impairments to conduct checks on the existing customer portals to help us and our clients become aware of their limitations, which were focusing on accessibility. We established contacts and collaborations with these experts so that we can continue this work further on during the evolution of this project. The insights phase of this project has now, as I said, moved into design and development. And this is ongoing work, and we're hoping that we can keep this pace of testing and evaluations continued throughout the course of this project, so that we keep focusing on how we can get better as we design and test the prototypes that we will come up with. This phase and working on this sort of accessibility and inclusion-driven rig showed us that scoping this work in advance makes it easier when you're trying to run the actual nitty-gritties of a project. This helps us manage expectations. It ensures that we are taking responsibility to deliver on user-focused, inclusive solutions, which are, again, accessible to as many people as possible. This kind of rig also paves the way for establishing and working on a continuous collaborations with experts who are at the receiving end of the services, who are using these accessibility tools, and they will help us and guide us in designing a digital platform, a digital service that is available, accessible, usable, and empowering for as many people as possible. Thank you.
You dressed up as a flower.
Yes. My name is Pankuri. So my name is Manuela. I'm from Chile, and I'm here to talk to you about a project that many of us at DESIGNIT have been involved. But we've been working with also a large number of stakeholders and organizations. You see here, the project is owned by Nordland fylkeskommune. It's one of the counties in Norway, the one that has the largest coast. 1/4 of the Norwegian coast is in Nordland. And we've been working together with Menon Economics, New University, 5 different municipalities in Nordland, Boda, Danne, Gildeskål, Herøy, and Rana, and also Rana Utvikling, which is kind of the business side of the municipality. And this project is funded by Stimulab, that tries to kind of stimulate innovation into the public sector. We started in December, and we're wrapping up now. And to differentiate a bit this project from what Siri presented, the tram, and Pankuri, Tensio, and Linnea, here we started with no solution in mind. We actually started with a problem. And the problem is Nordland is losing people. So demographics are going down, but actually the demographics of internationals in Nordland is slowly rising. And they really want to make it easier to attract competencies for local business development from abroad. So that was the challenge. And I will just kind of walk you through some of the methods that we use to ensure that whatever solutions we would propose or design, ensured that a lot of people would feel included. And that's actually started in the procurement process. So we proposed for the very first time in a public Norwegian procurement process, quite a diverse team with lived experience of relocating to Norway from abroad. So I'm from Chile, but we have Angel here from Puerto Rico, Shivani from India, Julia from Italy, from our partners from Menon, Danish or Denmark was represented, and Lynn, who was supposed to be here speaking today. She recently relocated 2 years ago after living 10 years abroad with her Scottish family. And we talked a lot earlier about the lived experience. We wanted to leverage our lived experience as internationals, working more as peers with the target group that we intended to design for. But also that meant we also had to be extra conscious about our own biases and assumptions around this group. So we had to do a lot of work and that not project our own experiences into others. We also used English or Norwenglish as a shared language, and that was quite new for a public procurement process. And we were super happy that they actually decided to go for such a diverse team speaking English. And we were all a bit outside our comfort zone, but collectively, and that I think has strengthened the project quite a bit. When it comes to recruitment, you both talked a lot about recruitment. Here we also try to really tap into many diverse perspectives that have both moved and left Nordland, but really not trying to segment anything around places of origin. We really wanted to stay away from reinforcing existing stereotypes. So when we segmented our research findings, it was more about needs and experiences rather than country of origin or age or gender. But we also looked at other perspectives from the private sector and the public sector. But when we were presenting our research insights, we also wanted to acknowledge the perspectives that we covered well, but also those that we didn't cover well, because we have limited time and resources. And it's super important that we can acknowledge that there are elements that we didn't manage to cover in the research phase, but then we have to be extra intentional to cover those perspectives in the co-design, the prototyping, and the testing phases. So it's okay that we can't do it all, but acknowledging and making a plan to mitigate for that is reducing risks. Here we have Shivani that's sitting in the back there. We had 2 co-creation workshops after the insights phase, one in Buda and another one in Mo i Rana. Where we invited people with lived experience, people from the public, from the private sector, to look at the insights that were quite broad and co-create ideas together. But one thing that we introduced for the first time that worked really well, and I will pass it along so you can see it later, is that when people were crafting ideas, then we had a DEI evaluation of the ideas, which responded to questions, for example, as what's the worst case scenario that this idea could unintendedly, so talking about intent versus impact, unintendedly lead to? Or how could this idea exclude or marginalize specific groups of people? Or how can this idea reinforce existing stereotypes or power dynamics? And we were really unsure about introducing these questions in an ideation workshop where you're supposed to kind of allow for anything to be possible. But they got so creative in this part. We thought that they were going to be paralyzed, and actually it was the opposite. So we were so happy to test this at a kind of quite a low threshold. So I'll just pass it along. And this is an idea of a buddy system and a welcome information package. But most importantly, all ideas come from Nordland. Solutions mitigate for unintended consequences and potential harm from the very start. And I'm going to talk a little bit about prototyping these ideas. So instead of us as a design team taking the ideas and running with them, we actually created different prototyping teams that could test in their local context. And these prototyping teams were also cross-sectorial. So we had different municipalities working together. We had public-private partnerships. And we also had state-level actors like UDI, working with local police and local tax authorities. So there were 3 tracks that we've been prototyping from March until June. And as we prototype, we also realize we're not only developing the capacity to develop the ideas, but also their internal capacity to iterate, to test with people, to think about bringing in multiple perspectives, and to create relationships and networks across all these groups of people, which then they presented all their process and their learnings in June, or 2 weeks ago in Buda. And just one last final point, because I see that we're running out of time. We also ingrained DEI in the visual identity. We ensured that this visual representation of Luna really represented the diversity that they want to become, but also acknowledge the legacy of the land. So you can see here from the imagery, we have different types of people, but also the colors are from the Sami flag, because that's the heritage of Nordland, and really trying to acknowledge what Nordland is and what it wants to become. So thank you.